Well, hello everybody, and welcome to a real estate investor's guide to property management. Today is April 8th, 2021. My name is Erik Smith. Been a while since I've seen you all. I haven't gone anywhere. I've just been floating suspiciously around on the periphery, but here I am. Looking forward to talking to you all about property management. So let's get started. Disclaimer, strategies mentioned may not be appropriate for everybody. Other options not mentioned may be more suitable for your specific circumstances. Consult your personal accountant, tax advisor, and/or attorney to discuss your specific situation. Past performance is never a guarantee of future results. We all know that, but real estate purchases are subject to investment risks. They go up, they go down, including the possible loss of amounts invested. While every effort is made to maintain accurate and current information, the possibility of errors and/or updates always exists. All right, property management. I'm just going to kind of ad hoc, ad lib this because I've been living this for so long and gone through and worked with so many different property managers that I arrogantly think I'm a pretty good person to rely on in terms of advice, because I don't want to say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot of stuff. And I think people get so caught up in what am I going to buy and where am I going to buy it, that they kind of forget that a crucial part of this is who's going to manage what I buy and where I buy it. Or they may not forget about it, but they don't give it the proper emphasis. And it's an easy thing to do. It's an easy trap to fall into. You're focusing on the house and the numbers and the rehab and the market, and not so much who's going to manage it after the fact. But anyway, so we're here to talk about that and how important it is, and how, you know, for many people it's more important than the property itself, as the slide says. I mean, that's a personal opinion. I kind of think it's important. I don't know if it's more important, but it just depends on your perspective. So let's talk a little bit about what is the purpose of a PM. And you can see they do all that stuff. Obviously, they collect the rent. They may or may not pay the mortgage and utility payments. I've never had a property manager pay any of those things, but they certainly can. They do a certain level of accounting services. They'll handle the leasing, which is a huge component of it. Security deposits, collect, keep track of, inspections of the property periodically. There sometimes is a fee, there sometimes is not, and repair and maintenance of the actual property. So they do a lot of stuff. I mean, they're not just sitting back in their back office waiting for the rent to come in, taking their 8% and mailing you the rest. There's a lot more involved in that. So let's delve into that a little bit. So I got a property recently in St. Petersburg, and I inherited one tenant. It was a duplex that I turned into a triplex, but the other half of it was vacant. So I was like, gee, you know, I live 45 miles away. Do I want to use a PM or do I want to handle it myself? And I ended up deciding to handle it myself. I've managed properties before only because I'm within 45 minutes. You know, I can drive there, and I was really familiar with the place. Every other property I have is professionally managed that's not within that immediate thing. And everything's going well, but man, I have a new appreciation. Just, you know, just yesterday, the tenant came to me and said, oh, the washer stopped working, because there's a shared washer dryer. And I'm like, gee, I was thinking to myself, I've got a spare washer across town sitting in a garage. And then I'm like, but I don't have a truck. I can hook it up, but I have to deal with getting rid of the old one. Then I have to, you know, it's just like, oh my God, forget it. So I just found a local used appliance place for $250, selected a new washer, and for $40, they showed up, hooked it up, got rid of the old one, boom, done. 24 hours later, taken care of. Now, if I didn't manage that property and I had a PM do it, I wouldn't even know. None of that, all that brain power it took of me yesterday, you know, not too much, but a couple hours, I never would have even known about it. I would have gotten my monthly statement at the end of the month, and it would have said, oh, $290 to replace broken washer. Oh, and I didn't mention that I brought a repair guy out first, who spent 2 days only to tell me that, oh, capacitor is busted. You need to get a new motor. So I'm like, okay, so there went 2 days for that. But anyway, all that brain power that I spent would not have been spent. I would have gotten a line item on my monthly statement saying, replace washer, $290. I'll be like, oh, okay, next. So it's like, they really do pay. They're worth their weight in gold. But the key is you have to find a good one. So anyway, enough with my side stories. So they lease the property. They advertise, find, screen, and place the tenant. All they're really looking for is credit record, make sure their FICO is decent, and that they make enough money, they confirm the income, and I hope they talk to the current and previous landlords. But still, that's a lot of work involved in doing that. And then they collect all the rent, sent the rental price, they collect security deposits, and they do all the accounting services. Now that's what they basically do, is they keep track every month of what was a repair, what was maintenance, what was a fee, So at the end of the year, you get a nice report, which you then can give to your CPA to then put on your Schedule E. So they do a lot of accounting services. And then another point is, they're supposed to know really well what that market is, how much things rent for. And, holding out for an extra $100 a month and the property sits vacant for one extra month and it rents for $1,400 a month, well, that's 14 months it'll take before you break even again. So they're supposed to, make those kind of decisions also. Utility payments, like I said, I've never had anyone do utilities for me. I have the bills sent to me and I pay them, but you can do that. Inspections of the property, some of the PMs offer once or twice a year. Well, they'll go out there, or like and Cincinnati says, all of her people on her team are unofficial property inspectors. They send a plumber out to fix a garbage disposal. The plumber is instructed to kind of look around the place, see if they see anything that maybe property management should know about. So you have an extra set of eyes on your property. Obviously, the biggie, number 7, repair and maintenance issues, handles all issues with the tenants. So you're not getting calls right as Aunt Mary and Uncle Fred are coming over for a Sunday barbecue and the kitchen sink's done stopped up. Get up here and fix it. It's like, nope, property manager's handling it. So the big thing here is retaining the tenants. Cash flow, you look at a pro forma and the cash flow is a couple hundred a month, that's great, but if you have turnover, it completely kills the cash flow. Place sits vacant for a month, and using my analogy from earlier, there goes the cash flow for 6 or 8 months. So the goal here really is finding good tenants initially and then keeping them. You want that tenant to stay 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I've got one tenant in Pittsburgh who's been there like going on 7 years, knock on wood, but so I don't really mind when they want a sidewalk crack fixed. It's like, that sidewalk crack, it pales in comparison to the amount of money I'd be spending if I had to replace a tenant every 16 months. So what I always try to impart to my PM is, you can't assume that they know the property manager. You can't assume that they have your same outlook on things. So it's always good to just kind of ask them, how do you feel about things? Make sure that they're not like, oh no, we're looking out for the owner number 1 above everything else. The tenant will bleed you dry if they could. It's like, no. I don't like that attitude. I want to have a symbiotic, happy relationship with my tenant. No, I'm not going to put gold inlaid countertops if they ask, but I'm going to keep the place maintained. I'm going to take good care of it and be responsive to them. I'm not going to be cheap, but I'm also obviously keeping an eye on my bottom line, and I want my property manager to do that as well. So it's always a good idea to just talk to them and just kind of ask them open-ended questions. Don't do what I have the habit of doing and supply the answer. Say, how many people do you manage? How many tenants do you manage? How many properties? How many people do you have on staff here at ABC Property Management? Do you have like 3 property managers and each one of them handles a specific 50 properties of 150 you have? Or do you have a different system? What is that system? What is your attitude about repairs? How do you determine that cracked window is something that the owner should pay? How do you know that, ADD laden son Billy didn't throw a baseball through it? certain things like that, and just ask them those open-ended questions so that you can kind of see if they're on the same page as you, and are really going to kind of be on top of things. Now, no property manager is perfect, and I'm talking as if it's a perfect world here, but you want someone who's on top of it, looking out for your best interests, not being overly militaristic with the tenants, but being firm and not allowing the tenant to take advantage of them. You definitely don't want that. Oh, well, I just talked about this. How long have you been in this business? That's a good one to ask. One point of contact. I have had situations where, people are like, yeah, the property manager is responsive, but every single time I call them, I'm talking to a different person, and I feel like I have to kind of start from the beginning again. So it's always nice to have one point of contact. There may be other systems, but it's a good question to ask. When I call, am I going to be talking with one particular person? How does the reporting work? That is a huge one. Communication. I would say 9 times out of 10, when we have a property manager that is not working out, where we're getting complaints about, it's because their communication is horrible. All they have to do is send out a property management statement once a month, maybe 3 weeks after the month ends, send out the March one, April 20th, roughly, here's the money that came in, here's the expenses that went out, here's our commission, and here's what's left over. This is the amount that's going to your bank account. Boom, done. That's all they have to do. And it's amazing to me, every once in a while I'll find a property manager that just doesn't do that. Or like every single month, deciphering their monthly statement is like, a Tetris puzzle of, requiring a 10-year algebra degree, and it's just not acceptable. So how does the reporting work? How often are they going to get you their statements? Is it going to come out on a regular basis? Maintenance, do they handle maintenance themselves? Do they have like 3 or 4 people on staff that they dispatch? Good. Or do they outsource all maintenance requests? They're calling A1 plumbing to go fix a small leak. Bad, because that means you're being charged rack rate for everything. Most property managers have a few handymen on staff, but then they don't keep a roofer on staff. So if something goes wrong with the roof, they'll call their go-to roofer guy or whatever. And then make sure they can explain the eviction process. Especially with all this eviction moratoriums and all the COVID-related stuff and everything else, it's a moving target. Every county, every city, every state is different. So I expect my property manager to know that stuff backwards and forwards. Hey, I live 2,000 miles away. I don't know what the eviction moratorium and what the state of Alabama has put in place about it, but I expect you to, Mr. Property Manager. So if Sally Sue doesn't pay her rent on April 1st, when do you turn in the 5-day notice or whatever it's called in their state? Every state's different. They need to know that stuff. And I do not expect them to, we'll file it in a couple of weeks. No, you need to file it now, because, I know I said earlier, I don't want to be militaristic, but when it comes to non-payment of rent, like there's clocks and timelines involved, and cities and states and multi-layers of bureaucracy. You need to get that clock starting to tick. You don't have to necessarily enforce things, but you need to get the clock ticking so that you can say, yes, we are evicting Sally Sue. We she was late on April 1st. We filed a 5-day notice April 5th. That started the 30-day clock. It's now May 5th, so we're filing this writ of whatever it is, blah, 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 blah. So it's really crucial that they are really on top of that type of stuff. Okay. Oh, do they make a profit on maintenance and repairs? That's a good one to ask, because you don't want your property manager seeing repairs as a profit center for them. Now, I don't mind it if they make a little bit. It's just like I explained with the washer dryer thing. Hey, that was a few hours of my time. They're doing that, so I don't mind them making a little bit, but I don't want them incented to find repairs that your property needs. So it's always good to ask that. And a lot of times, quite frankly, asking these questions tells the property manager that you're asking these questions and you want to know this stuff and you're kind of on top of it. So it's a good thing to do. All right, are your goals aligned? I want a happy and low maintenance tenant. I do not want a churn and burn approach for the reasons I articulated earlier. High turnover, killing cash flow, wear and tear on the property. You don't want any of those things. And I see people are paying. I see people are asking questions. Thank you for that. I forgot to mention that. Just go ahead and type stuff in, and I will do better at keeping an eye on the question box here. Oh, does your PM know to buy the used washer? Mine has bought new since it was easier. Lazy to find deals. Haha. Yeah, I put a used washer in there. $250, Whirlpool. I'm not paying 600 bucks for some brand new washer. No way. Okay, some of the realtors RealWealth recommends come bundled with property management companies. Is there an advantage to this? Well, okay, let's correct terminology. We don't have realtors, we have property teams, and most of our property teams have a preferred PM that they have a working relationship with that they like. Probably about 40% of our property teams do the property management themselves. About half of them do. The other half use a third-party property management company. I think I've done both. I think it's okay if it's a third party, as long as the property team in Saskatchewan uses XYZ property management in Saskatchewan. They know each other. They work together all the time. That's fine. You know, you just don't want the he said, she said, them pointing fingers at each other. But it's also nice when, like with Houston or Cincinnati, they do their own property management. They're big enough to where they have a division in their company that's property managers. So let's see. I'm going to just bang out some of the questions here. Regarding property manager paying utilities, you could clarify for other listeners that for any utilities are lienable like water that need to stay in owner's name, property manager may need to forward the bill to them or monitor that the tenant is paying those bills. Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about a multifamily situation, a duplex, triplex, quad, 12-unit building, then there's a lot of costs that the owner pays, and they then choose whether to bill that back to each individual tenant. But then there's also cities like Cleveland that for whatever reason demand that the owner of the property keep the water in their name. So you can't just go, okay, Sally Sue, new tenant, make sure you get the electricity, gas, sewer, water, all in your name. Here's the phone numbers. It's like, no, that doesn't work in Cleveland and some other cities. So then you want the property manager to do exactly as Sherry mentions here, that the PM keeps it in either their name or, well, the owner's name, and then they bill back the tenant. But anyway, that only really applies in some situations, in some places. Okay, I'm gonna eliminate some of these questions here. Okay, here's a question from Dorothy. If we are buying the house from out of state and have not seen the house, how normal is it for the property manager to help us do the final walkthrough? Well, I don't know how normal it is. It's awfully nice of them to do. If someone's doing the walkthrough, it would make sense that it be the property manager, so that you have a snapshot in time as to exactly what the property's condition was in when you handed the keys over to the new tenant. And hopefully they'll walk through the room with all the house with their iPhones, including outside, just to kind of have that as a record. Just like your property inspection is a nice, much more detailed snapshot in time. But I think it's fairly regular and normal, and I think it's a good idea. Winston mentions that home protection plans are very helpful for my rentals. Yep, they can be, absolutely. Do you verify the expected rent with Rentometer or a similar tool? On that one that I rented, I did do that, yes. I haven't been blown away though, because there was a real wide range. It's like, okay, yeah, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath can rent for $750 to $1,350. Pretty wide range there. So I end up having to do a lot of the work to kind of narrow it down anyway. Okay, Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Please provide tips on how to proceed when things go wrong. What has to be considered if you are forced to change PMs? That's a good one. Example, does the old PM still have to do collections on tenants they placed and evicted? Okay, you know what? That's a really good question. I don't want to derail the presentation. I'm going to come back to that, okay? Promise, because it's a really good one. All right, so back to the slide here. Does the PM have the same goals as you? Make sure that they do. Talk to them, ask those questions. Typical PM fees, 75% of 100% of the first month's rent to advertise for, screen, find, and place a tenant. And then the ongoing maintenance after that is typically 8 to 10%. Most of our property teams charge 8. There's a few like Dallas that are a little low below that. I think they're in the 6s, and there are a few in the cheaper markets that are up and around 10. Because it takes just as much work in a cheap market to manage a tenant than in an expensive market, and so they charge 10%. Again, totally worthwhile, completely understand it. $250 tenant renewal fee. Sometimes people get pushback on that, and like, what? You're just having them sign a new lease. No, they're running the FICO, they're running the credit checks, they're verifying they still have their job, making sure they haven't, moved a murder of crows into the back bedroom while they were gone. They're doing all that type of stuff. So $250 re-up fee, definitely worth doing. Critical aspects of your PM is that they are local. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I don't like working with PMs that are based in Kansas City, but my property is in St. Louis. Oh yeah, we have a satellite office out there. It's like, well, do you really? I mean, I don't know. What does that mean, satellite office? Do you have a staff there in St. Louis, or are you going to drive however many hours it is? I mean, that's crucial. So that would almost be a deal killer for me. You need to have an office and an operation and a staff within, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes of where my property is. Maybe I should say an hour. I don't know. Some areas are big like Dallas. Communication, absolutely key. That's when everybody freaks out, is when they haven't heard anything from their PM. And accessibility, how accessible are they? I mean, that's huge. I have a CPA that he doesn't answer the phone, but he gets back to me either right then or right away. And it's just so nice. I used to have a CPA that, like, during tax season, he's like, I don't even try to get a hold of me. It's like, well, anyway, it's an issue for me. Your PM needs to be very accessible, and they need to be local, and they have to have great communication. Just one quick aside, I have a really good client of RealWealth. She's bought a few different properties in Huntsville and had an issue with this property manager that I'd never heard of. They were using this property manager, and they just, rent stopped coming in about 4 or 5 months ago, and there was always some excuse. So the tenant, got the COVID, and or maybe they lost their job because of COVID. Something was happening, and it's like the property manager just kind of went into a cocoon and just like, well, what are we gonna do? And this client was like, it's been like 4 months, and I was like, what are you doing? No, you have to be like, you have to manage this manager. And in their case, that manager clearly needed to be managed. It was really very unfortunate. But it's like, no, first of all, what's the laws regarding their situation? And I'm being very vague because I don't remember all the details. What are the laws? Most of the time it's like, okay, maybe you lost your job due to a COVID-19 related situation, but that just doesn't just give you a free meal ticket ad infinitum. I mean, there's certain things like that you have to, so make sure the PM knows that, and that you are enforcing that the PM does know that. And if they're going into a cocoon, can them, get a new one. We'll help you find a new one. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So anyway, they're doing that, and we'll get back to Lisa's question a little bit about what to do when you do have to get rid of a PM. Okay, so there are good PMs and there are bad PMs. Glorified rent collectors, bad PM. Proactive and communicative, good PM. And I'm not being flip here, but they're not hard to spot. You just have to ask these questions and see what they say. And maybe even, I don't know, ask for a tenant reference or two. But one thing I will, in defense of property managers, they all get panned on Yelp. If you go on to Yelp and try to find, people, it's kind of like the bad tenants are more upset at the property manager than the good tenants are happy with the property manager. So the bad tenants are much more likely to write evil things on Yelp. Just like, your local police department probably wouldn't get very good reviews on Yelp either, because all the perps would write bad things about them. Anyway, so just I keep repeating myself, but just ask those questions. Make sure you like what they have to say. There are other property managers, there's other games in town. But anyway. All right, so let's talk about, I've got some more questions here, but I want to go back to Lisa's thing. Please provide tips on how to proceed when things go wrong. What has to be considered if you are forced to change property managers? Example, does the old PM still have to do collections on tenants they place and evicted? Okay, there's no way around it. It's a touchy situation, right? And, you don't want to just fly off the handle and totally burn the bridge with the old property manager. What I usually do is try to not really project that I'm thinking of leaving, because in my mind, the incentive for the property manager is to treat me well so that we can get a new tenant. So I'm like, look, Sally Sue hasn't paid for 3 months. We've now reviewed what the rules are. Are you up to speed with what the timeline is? What is the timeline? When are you going to get this tenant out? Okay, when you get the tenant out, I want you to go in there and give me a ascertainment of what it is to do a make ready. How much are you going to charge me to do a make ready? Don't start on the make ready, and don't start advertising for a new client for a new tenant, because I may want to sell the property. I don't know what I'm going to do, Mr. Old property manager, but just tell me when we're clear. When the tenant is out, tell me, and then give me a line item for the make ready. Okay, they do that. You haven't told them that you're dumping them. Meanwhile, read your property management agreement and see what it says. A lot of times it says, either party can terminate this agreement with 30-day written notice or whatever. So it's like, well, there's your conundrum. It's like, I don't know, it's April 7th. The tenant's going to be out at the end of April. You're not going to use the old property manager, but you were supposed to file a 30-day written thing 7 days ago. Do you do that or not? It just depends on the situation. I probably would, because I don't want to sit around for a whole 30 days. And I would hope that a property manager, especially if they've kind of messed up, that they wouldn't hold me to that. And that was the case with the Huntsville example. It's like there was all these 30-day stuff, and they didn't hold her to any of that, last I heard, because I think they felt guilty for going into a cocoon over that COVID situation. But it's basically one of those things where you want to keep the relationship with the old one cordial so that they're working with you, and not necessarily telegraph that you're moving. But at a certain point, you have to tell them, hey, I'm having a realtor look at this, and they also manage properties. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to sell or remanage, but I'd like you to be cooperative. Their name is Joe Schmo, and here's their phone number. And hopefully those two will communicate. Property manager 1 will give property manager number 2 the key, and everybody's happy, and we ride off into the sunset. To Lisa's question about does the old PM still have to do collections on tenants they placed and evicted? They're not going to want to do much for you once they aren't making their monthly fee. And so most likely, no, the new tenant will need to do that. So new property manager will need to do that. So I would talk to the new property manager. I mean, obviously, if you're not happy with property manager number 1, and you're calling us or you're finding a new property manager, you're going to have a conversation with that property manager. Here's what's going on. Here's the situation. Here's how long the tenant's been there. Here's how long they haven't paid. I'd like to fire the old property manager. What do you feel about that? Do I need to completely tie it in a neat bow and hand you over an empty house? Or are you okay with inheriting some of the skeletons from the past, and then act accordingly based on what they say? I mean, also, it's like, how bad is the old one? How quickly do you want to erase them from your phone records? That's the key too. All right, I hope that answers the question to a certain degree. Wow, a lot of questions here. All right, rents up so much. If we are 20% below market, how much to increase rent to existing renewing tenant? 5, 10, 15? Keep 5% below market and be happy with renewal? It's one of those things. If rents in an area have gone up 20% and you want to raise the rent 20% to a tenant that's been there a couple of years and is paying rent, takes care of the place, there's a real good chance you're going to mess up that relationship. First of all, they might say, I'm out of here. And now you've just completely messed up, because you're going to have at least 1 month of zero income, which will, the 20% would take a while to catch up. But if they don't leave, you could potentially, harm the relationship. So I would do 5 to 10, and just make sure they know that they're, in a nice way, like, I don't know. you have to do it in a way that I don't like subsidizing, and I'm not in the subsidization business. So I am going to raise rents if the prices go up, but I'm not going to do it in such a way that's going to annoy the tenant that I'm there. I mean, even a 5% is going to annoy them, but hell, inflation is 3 to 4%. So, I mean, come on, and look what's happening. So I would raise it between 5 and 10. I wouldn't go 15 or 20. You'll catch that up over time. Okay, get rid of that question. We answered that one. I answered that one. What about using Zillow for rent estimates? Well, I mean, that's one choice, but Zillow is not very reliable. They're just using these massive algorithms based on zip code and area code. They don't know that your windows and hardwood floors have just been replaced. They're just looking at 2-bedroom, 1 bath in that zip code. I think it's a much better idea to go onto local property managers' websites and see what they have available. Plot it out on a map, see what's near your area, see what they're charging, what the pictures look like. Way more reliable. Or just use a property manager. Let them carry that load. Is it kosher to have your property manager be involved in the vetting of a property you're considering making an offer on? Can we have them weigh in on the rentability of a prospective property before we purchase? Absolutely. Why not? I mean, you know, hey, 3-bedroom, 2-bath in the old Northeast neighborhood, or 2-bedroom, 1-bath in the Roser Park neighborhood of St. Petersburg. Which one do you think, Mr. Tenant, Mr. Property Manager? And they'll say, oh, Roser Park is flying off the shelves so fast we can't even keep them in stock. It's like, you know, they'll have some insight. Absolutely. I don't see any reason why not to do that. Please clarify why you just suggest that the owner PM keep the electricity in their name and bill tenant. If the tenant put the electric in their name and don't pay, there's no lien. Oh yeah. We're not suggesting, certainly not suggesting that you keep any utilities in your name. I want my tenants to have them in their name. The only time utilities are in my name or the property manager's name is when the property is vacant. We have to have a placeholder. We were talking about earlier in Cleveland and in some other cities, the municipality requires that the water stay in the name of the owner. They won't allow you to put it in the name of a tenant. So in that case, you have to keep it in the name of a tenant. Would you replace your property manager if the communication is poor, but they're great on every other aspect? When I call, it's always someone different answering phones. No, I wouldn't replace them due to that. I mean, if they're collecting rents, if they're giving you the reports, if the rents are coming in on time, if the tenant seems decent, and they just never tell you anything that's going on and you have to reach out to them to information, is that annoying? Yes, it is. Is it worth ripping them, firing them and getting a new one? No, I don't think so. Are property management companies bonded by some regulations and laws limiting them from sharing tenant information with the owner? I found that all my PM companies are reluctant to share what they have on prospective tenants with me when asking my approval for tenant placement. Well, I know that with credit scores, there's all kinds of regulations on that. They can't tell you the credit score, the FICO. You know, I don't know, but I suspect that yes, if they're afraid that if they tell you that it's, I don't know, a single mother, and maybe you have a bias against single mothers, that you'll say no based on that rather than actual merits of the tenant application. And the tenant may make those allegations. And so everyone's just in CYA mode about stuff. And you know, for me, I don't really even want to know. I pay a property manager to manage the property, and that includes deciding whether the tenants are good or not. And I expect that you won't put someone in there with a 550 credit score, you know, a lousy reference and a, you know, an $18,000 a year job. I expect that you have standards and you will not place anybody below that, and that you will place people above that, provided that they meet those requirements, but then they also can complete a sentence, are friendly, you get a good vibe off of them, and that their previous and current landlords give them a good report. But I don't really want to know, because that's what I pay them for. But yeah, I think that there probably are some reasons for that. Let's see. Sorry, should PMs recommend security cameras for owners' investment properties? Any recommendations? Well, certainly not inside. Obviously, they would only be outside. I've never had one recommend one to me. I've never done that myself. That's a good one. I don't know. I mean, you can buy those little doorbell things. I don't know. I don't know. Just more data that clouds up my already overfilled brain. Do you want to sell the property? If you want to sell the property, do you have to use PM real estate agent? Absolutely not. In fact, personally, I wouldn't, because property managers deal with other investors. Other investors generally want to pay a lower rate. If I'm selling a property, I want a realtor that is selling the property to end users out on the open MLS multiple listing service. I think I get a better price than doing it that way. So you can use your PM, and I don't want to make PMs mad who like to do that. You certainly can do that. I wouldn't. I find a local realtor. A workaround for 30-day termination notice. I just canned a PM. Thanks, Rory. That's funny. How do PMs charge for repairs? Do they bill us or have access to an account for this purpose? Generally, what PMs do is when you sign a property management agreement, there will be a reserve. It's usually $250, maybe $300. They'll say, hey, anything that's under $350, we're just going to use, and we're not even going to ask you. We're just going to fix whatever it is, or we're going to use that reserve. If it's over that $350 or $300, we'll call you. Hey, Ben, the washer dryer went out. It's going to be $600. What do you want to do? And so they keep that reserve. So if they collect, they have a security deposit and the month's rent, they'll send you all the stuff for that month minus that reserve, and that reserve stays with the PM to use for those type of things. Okay. Rory says he's had to can PMs in the past. He's given them the same notice, but paid them for the next 30 days so they don't lose out. Yeah, that's a good idea. And when you think about it, they're charging 8% of the rent. So if your place rents for $1,000, that's $80. All right. Yes, I know you need 30-day notice. Here's $80 for the upcoming month if they ask, and then immediately have the new PM. I don't like having lame duck property managers riding out the last month. I want the new, shiny new eager beaver taking care of the property right off the bat. Should a PM provide you with copies of every communication with the tenant? No. I want the lease, and I want that in my portal. Hopefully the PM has a portal, and I want them to keep me abreast if they are doing an eviction or 30-day or whatever, but I don't need every piece of paper. There's a portal. It should be loaded in the portal. What is proportion of good bad PMs on average? I don't know. I remember one time I lived in Phoenix, and for some reason I had this property that I used to live in managed by the Phoenix property manager, and it had one of those swamp coolers, evaporative air coolers on the roof. And I drove by and I was like, what the heck? The property manager doesn't even notice anything, but there's a cascade of water coming down the roof. Nothing major, but like a tablespoon a minute. But it had calcified. The hot Phoenix sun had turned the hard water into this white stripe down my. And anyway, I fired that PM. I'm like, this has obviously been going on for months. Do you ever even look at the property? They were bad in other ways, but I have no idea what the good bad percentage is. I think probably most of them are probably pretty good. But I'd just be guessing. I don't know, 70-30, good. Let's see. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, Rory, this is a really good one. Also, people need to be aware that some property management agreements have large termination fees in the fine print, so read them before signing. Another PM I canned last year was owed monthly fees for the entire lease period, so I had to time the termination to sync with the lease renewal date, less 30 days for advance notice. That happened to me once too. Again in Phoenix, and I was just like, what? It seemed punitive and nickel and diming, and it's like, I own a lot of properties. I might come back to you, but I won't now, but. Yeah, so definitely read the property management agreement. And I also have had property management managers agree to take out certain particularly arduous things I didn't like. Like, what? No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to use you if I want to sell the property. What? Red line, red line. And, they'll take that stuff out. That's only happened to me once. Thank you, Rory, that helps. And Lisa says, security cameras, careful, check with attorney. Yeah, absolutely, nothing inside. I'm just thinking like the front view of the house, maybe you can do that. But yeah, the last thing you want to do is do something that gets you into legal hot water down the road. All right, let's see. Okay, this person said they did have their PM provide them with a tenant FICO. Okay, I guess it's possible. Do you agree that critical is tenant placement? Do you agree that tenant placement is critical? How do you assure your PM's criteria will get you a reliable, non-destructive tenant? Well, I think trust comes into the equation at a certain point. I like to think the PM, they don't want to place a bad tenant. They're going to inherit the headache that is, more so than you will. You'll inherit the financial aspect of the headache, but they're going to be the ones calling everybody, calling the attorneys, lining up the process server, making the court appearances, They're not going to want to do that. So I just trust that they're following their own internal procedures. Maybe I'll say, hey, if you've got somebody on the fence, I'd rather you just not even place them. But if you want, I'll be the second set of eyes on the lease, sure. And they can do that. But yes, I do agree that tenant placement is critical. I had a property manager who gave the utility company the wrong property address. It was an innocent mistake, but it resulted in the gas in my vacant rental being turned off. The pipes froze and did extensive damage. The property manager basically said, tough luck. Do property managers have any responsibility to pay for their mistakes? Depending on how much that was, that cost you, I might talk to a local attorney there and see. Obviously, the bridge with that PM will be burnt at that point. But if they're just saying tough luck, it's like, well, you gave them the wrong address. So I don't know. I think it would depend on the laws in your local state. Okay, let's see. Apart from a fully executed lease, what other documents should the owners collect from the property managers at tenant move-in? Again, we talked about this earlier. They should load all that stuff in the tenant portal. Tenant walkthrough, initial walkthrough document, any legal stuff that gets filed, all that stuff they'll have, and they should upload it for you. The lease is the most important. Insurance companies and everybody else wants the lease. You need to have access to that. What is the good ratio to property manager? What is a good ratio to property manager to units managed? Oh, I think it really does depend on how well their system is and what they have that property manager do. If I were a PM, I wouldn't want to manage any more than about 50 properties, but that also assumes I'm doing everything. If that particular property manager has a whole team of people, they've got the financial people that drop the leases, they've got the maintenance people that go out and do, it depends on how the division of labor is set up. A PM may be able to do more than 50 if they're kind of like the quarterback that's having everybody else do something else. So I don't think there is one hard and fast answer. Maybe go to the property manager, and if all the PMs have a stressed out look on their expression, on their faces, it's probably time to lower their ratio a little bit. What kind of discounts can we expect for managing multiple properties? In other words, if you have one PM manage 5 properties, probably not much of one, because it's still just as much work. And that's certainly a question you can ask them, but I don't think you can expect any discount necessarily. There are a few in our system that will give a point or two off once you get to property number 3, but I can't tell you which ones those are. Okay, Marcus says, I disagree. I cannot trust by default. We must do careful due diligence on the PM and check references and track record. Okay, yeah, I just do not have the time. Marcus, you may, and that's great, and there's certainly nothing wrong with doing that. Let's see. Sorry, people. I'm trying to decide which questions to take here. What is the standard time to fill a vacancy? Most of our property managers, if you watch the webinars, they'll say, we fill within 3 to 4 weeks. I'm sorry, 2 to 3 weeks typically. I had one property in St. Pete, and my fault. I let it go too long. It just took way too long. It sat vacant for like 3 months. And back to Marcus's point, I should have been, and my point, I should have been more aggressive with them. But I just kind of let it ride, and they lowered the rent $100, and boom, it was rented. I'm like, darn it, why didn't they do this 3 months ago? Why didn't I notice that they hadn't done that yet? So yeah, you definitely have to manage the property manager. I just don't go so far as to scrutinize every dotted I and crossed T on a lease. That's just where I cross the line. Let's see. Every solid PM company has good references and plenty of investment groups that we can ask online. Yeah, absolutely. If they balk at giving you a reference, not a good sign. I gave my new PM my 5 criteria scoring system. He loves it. Solves placement issues. Oh, that's great. Alan, if you ever wanted to share that, email it to me, ben@realwealth.com, and maybe I can, genericize it and share it with people. If a PM places a bad tenant, they also get re-rent work, first month's rent. Yep, exactly. Yeah. Apart from scope and invoice of repairs completed, do you expect PMs to also provide photos of completed repairs? I think it would depend on what the repair is. I have a house in Pittsburgh, the one with the 6-year tenant, and the maintenance people from the PM send, hey, we really need a new walkway out back. Tenants complaining about it buckling, and seizing in the Pittsburgh winters. And they sent me pictures of the new one, and yeah, I want to see it afterwards. But if they're replacing a tiny little crack in a window, I don't need to see pictures. That's a personal preference. How often should a PM drive by the property to do an exterior visuals check? I don't know, at least every 6 months. I like Missy's system where she has every time anybody goes by there, whether they're a plumber or a landscaper or whatever, they ask that person to look at the property overall. Don't just have their landscape lenses on. Look at the overall thing and report back if they see anything that raises any flags. They may be there to do a termite treatment if they have a termite person on staff and notice that the gutter over there has fallen down, so they'll report that. Or 8 cars parked out front, or something that's kind of like, what's going on? Is it Thanksgiving? Why are there 8 cars out front? All right, let's see. My property management agreement implies that if I terminate them before the end of the tenant lease, I would have to pay them PM fees for the remaining months of the lease. Does that seem right? Not to me, but I've seen that in the past. I would think 30 days, maybe 60 makes sense, but for the rest of the agreement, I think in the PM's defense, what they're trying to avoid you doing is using them to do the heavy lifting of finding, screening, advertising for, placing, handing over the keys, moving in a tenant, and then firing them on month number 2 to where then all you have to do is collect the rent. That's what they're trying to avoid, and I understand that to a certain degree, but for the rest of the period, I don't really like that. Okay, let's see. Do you want copies of all receipts for any work performed? It would be nice. I would hope that they keep them on file. Usually anything that's above that 250 or 350 threshold, they will send to me, and I have. Let's see, I took care of that one, took care of that one, took care of that one. Okay, the security deposit is supposed to go into an interest-bearing account. Who handles that? Okay, that varies from state to state. I've seen them where it doesn't have to go into an interest-bearing, but yeah, the PM is supposed to handle that. And then when 5 years from now, hopefully, when the tenant gives their notice and move out, $1,500 times whatever the 1.25% interest or whatever. It's kind of a moot point, honestly, because most of the time there's something that's taken out of the security deposit. But the PM does handle that. Some PM companies offer finding tenants only. Works if you're in a situation where you are able and want to self-manage. Yeah, that's true. Is PM responsible for keeping rental license? Yes, property managers need to have a property manager license. Absolutely, they They operate underneath a broker, a real estate broker. So there is a line of communication and a line of responsibility there. Oh yeah, in Massachusetts, Amit writes, you have to give back interest every year, no matter how much it is. Interesting. Okay, well, there's a tenant-friendly state for you. All right, let's see. If the unit is not rented for more than 3 months, the insurance does not cover any vandalism. Any idea how to retain coverage if it is not rented within 3 months? Well, first of all, check with your insurance company to make sure that that is in fact the case with them. I have had, when I bought a property on a Burr model years ago and it was vacant for like 9 months, I had to carry a vacant, much more expensive insurance policy. And boy, it was nice when I had a tenant and I could just go down to a normal rental dwelling policy that was half as much. But yeah, most, you could call Allstate or State Farm or your insurance broker and say, hey, is it 3 months? Is that 90 days? And can I switch over if for some reason it's not rented in 90 days? I think the bigger question is, why is your property not vacant for 90 days? Take care of that issue. Okay, let's see. Took care of that, took care of that. Okay, this might be a repeat question. It is not, but can I use a RealWealth property manager if I don't purchase a property through RealWealth? That's up for the property manager to ask. You can just say the property was in, I don't know, come on, Ben, think of the city, Houston. Go into RealWealth Network, log into the Houston, go to the Houston page, go to the How to Connect area, and contact that property manager and ask them. We have people do that. They're buying a property in Houston and they already own 2 or 3 more and they would like to roll them all in. That's completely up to the property manager's discretion. Are they in a position where they want to take on more clients? Is your property in the right neighborhood? A lot of times I'll see situations where the property manager is like, no, we don't go on that side of the freeway. It's like you bought a scary property in a scary neighborhood. We don't want to manage it. Let's see. John writes, is that okay to have my friend manage the property? Yeah. I mean, hopefully the friend knows what they're doing and isn't going to get you into trouble. And will be responsive to the tenant and communicate to you. But yeah, it's perfectly fine. Most PMs have 1 or 2 preferred companies that they use to do maintenance. But is it reasonable to ask the property manager to get several estimates for expensive jobs? Yeah, it absolutely is reasonable to do. Absolutely. Took care of that one. I think that is about it. All right, anybody have any last minute questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Let's see, questions, comments. That's what we've been doing for the last half an hour. All right, so if you are ready to invest, things are coming in, but you feel you're ready, there we are. There's me on the left, there's Leah, Aristotle, Joe. Everybody on this call has an investment counselor that you're already assigned to. Just reach out to them and have a conversation. Do a session if you haven't already. Do one if you already have. Just talk about what markets are right for you. Just keep in mind that right now inventory is tough. I mean, what I've been telling people is that if you're looking for rehab properties, there's really only, I don't know, like Birmingham, Cleveland, Tampa, Indianapolis, Baltimore. But there's not too many people that have rehab properties because there's just not that. And with the new switching over to new construction takes between 8 and 18 months between the time that you put your EMD, earnest money deposit, down and the time the property is completed. And it could be less than that in some markets, or it could be more than that. So you have to have patience in today's market. It is definitely a low inventory market everywhere. Here's a question. Does RealWealth have a PM in Jacksonville, Florida? Yes, we do. Go on to the website, check in and see them. All right, moving on here. If you're not quite ready to invest, you're like, hey, this sounds great, but I'm still going to kind of do some more due diligence, check into some other markets, educate yourself. All the information you need is on our website. I mean, it is there. But you can also call your investment counselor for color commentary, and we don't hold back our opinions. We're not just hapless cheerleaders for everything. You know, some people like certain markets better than other markets. So by all means, thank you. By all means, check into the website, watch the webinars. I knew that was going to happen. I guess I need to put a lock on that door. Anyway, every single time we do a webinar every week, we archive it. So like I said at the very beginning of the webinar, Chicago's coming up in the upcoming week. So if you're interested in the Chicago market, watch that webinar. You don't have to watch it live, although it's nice. You can ask questions like thanks for all these great questions that everybody's been asking. They're fantastic questions. But you can always watch it on an archive basis, which allows you to go back in the past and watch archives for any of the markets that we have. Podcasts, Kathy has 2 great podcasts, the RealWealth Show and News also. So the News Show and the RealWealth Show. The investor portal is investor.realwealth.com. And we've got all kinds of blog posts. So if you're not quite ready to jump off and meet with your IC and pick a market, the information's right there on the site. And we encourage people to take advantage of that as much as possible. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. See if there's any last minute questions that came in. If you want to do a 1031 exchange and want to invest in a new property, does the 18-month lead time not make it possible? Fantastic question, Deborah. And yes, the 18-month lead time, it doesn't make it impossible, but it makes it very, very difficult. There are ways around it. It involves advanced planning. Pick properties first, put them on your identification list, but hold back. Don't sell your 1031 for about a year. And then when you sell your 1031, you've got properties that a year ago you put under contract and they're almost ready. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is there are occasional new properties that come up that are rare, or just go rehab in those markets I said. If you don't, save your new construction properties for non-1031s and do rehab for 1031s. That way you don't have to have the stress of the timelines. All right, we are done. Thank you so much. My name is Ben Smith. Loved having you guys with us. We'll do Chicago a week from today. Thank you so much. See you again soon. Bye-bye.